am totally inspired by our Sacred Cup conversation this morning. The group that gathered to talk about this subject at 9:15 was profound. So thank you all for showing up and helping me set this lesson up. But at any rate, today I want to start off right off the bat with a quote. So here it is. Following our curiosity, envisioning our ways forward, all with a mindset of experimentation in a field fraught with disappointment, these things bring light. Of course we will fail. Of course we will need to give ourselves countless self-compassion breaks. But curiosity, experimentation, persistence, tenacity, and the expectation of failure will yield results. You will learn, pivot, adjust, and achieve. It's the curiosity, experimentation, persistence, tenacity, and expectation of failure will yield. I thought when I read the little phrase, expectation of failure, I thought that's not in alignment with what we teach, right? But when I consider it further, it basically affirms, expect those obstacles to present themselves. They give us a chance to do all the rest of it. Learn, pivot, adjust, and achieve. I'll give you a small example of my lesson today, and it's from the Book of Awakening by Mark Nepo. If you've never been, we're up early, eager to walk the botanical gardens of Montreal. Strolled toward the Chinese temple garden, a lush yet simple retreat from the streets that covers acres, a place of stone by stone to Montreal in 1990. So as we approached the massive gate, it was locked. I panicked, ready to demand entry after driving 400 miles from another country to see this. Robert calmly, like an Oriental sage himself, its very assumptions shifted. He began to walk the outer wall of the garden. It seemed insurmountable. I was frustrated. He kept walking slowly along the high wall. Since the garden stretched for acres, I wondered if we would have to walk the entire perimeter. The thought made me cranky, but he kept strolling. Suddenly, when we had walked farther than was originally in our view, the walls disappeared. It turned out that the garden had no walls, save for the So how many thresholds that seem blocked? How many opportunities for true living are barrier-free if we can only remove ourselves and our minds from their traditional points of entry? How frequently we see a barrier and we simply walk away. Believing that our way is blocked, we walk away. Without considering the point to fail, then we got to stay curious and learn and pivot and achieve, right? Okay, those of you who haven't been around, I went to Africa with 11 friends for a couple of weeks in September, right? September. And I do have a story that illustrates. It was our final destination in Africa where we did different safari experiences. I met a very special game lodge, and we got on this tiny little plane. It had 12 seats on it, and there were 11 of us. Okay, it was a tiny plane. It took us from Chobe over to Shindi, which is on the Okavango Delta, which is another part of Botswana. And I'm not going to go into the details about how challenging that flight was, but this is how the plane did. All the way for more than an hour, right? And I'll just say that we're all green, very green, when we landed after that 1 hour flight that looked like that. Anyway, we landed on this grass landing strip, not even a runway, just a little piece of grass. We landed. And we were met by these 3 Jeeps, like Land Rover kind of Jeep things, open air vehicles. And those vehicles drove us from the airstrip, if you want to call it that, the grass, over to the camp that wasn't really that far away. And as we were approaching the camp, in the distance we could see all these people were lined up, several people lined up in the line, waiting for our arrival. And it turns out they were the green, remember? Cool towels and songs, they were singing. And this additional man came out from the camp and to join the group. He just came running, and he sang enthusiastically and joyfully with the group, and he made an immediate impression on me. I couldn't take mine. We returned, and they had like this circle of chairs that was happy hour around a campfire. Oh, it was happy, trust me. There was some sinning going on. We sat around this fire in these circle of chairs, right? And just as it would happen, I was seated right next to that joyful, happy and joyful. And that started our conversation. And it continued throughout that hour. We talked, and then we reconnected a couple of other times during our time at Shindy so he could tell me his story. Galani, do you see his smile? He's just So here's Galani's story. So Galani grew up in a remote part of Botswana, far from any city, and I'm talking hundreds of miles from any city. And he said he grew up listening to American music, like rap music, a love of John Legend. That was one of our connecting points. So listening to another continent, he dreamed of going to America. He couldn't imagine how we would, as many of us, long and dream of going to Africa. But we agreed that we should be paying attention to what we dream, because sometimes the barriers are not as real as we think they are. So anyway, he was growing up listening to this music, and he also became aware. So as children all over the world do, he dreamed how he would ever be able to go to Disney World. He just saw too many barriers, right? So he, I believe, thinking that he would work at one of the safari camps, because that was a way that they could live there. And there was this little city called Mau, safari camps, helping tourists experience his homeland like us that were there. So somehow along the way, he said he heard about a guy who had left Africa. So he listened to that spark. He went on Disney, and he didn't. He was kind of at that wall that Mark, Nepo, and Robert were at the garden. But just like he didn't have reliable internet where he was, and one day when he went into the city, he found an internet cafe, and he checked his email again, and there, dated only one day after he had sent his application to Disney, was an email from the Disney HR department asking him to send a copy of his driver's license and his passport. He had neither. He didn't have a driver's license nor a passport. So he wrote back and said he would be back in touch as soon as he could get those things taken care of. And again, he thought, that dream is gone, right? So he got his driver's license pretty quickly. That worked and everything for the passport, and he heard nothing. Weeks of this, and was told that the photo, no one had told him that. So he was furious that there had been no communication at all about that. So he got another photo made, and he submitted it. And a few weeks later, he got his passport, and finally, with the 2 documents in hand, he got back in touch. He drove all the way back to Mount to get on the internet again and send those to Disney. So thinking he had taken way too long, he doubted that they would ever even want to hear from him again, but he was wrong. He said the next thing Disney wanted was for him to submit a police clearance verification, like a background check, basically, which would also take some time to accomplish in rural Botswana, but somehow he jumped through all the hoops, and he got that done eventually too. Now, finally, with all the necessary documents in hand, Disney could finally make their determination. And not long after that, he was notified that the Disney hiring team would be coming to meet him in Africa. They didn't fly him there, they went there. And remember that charming smile and that personality I mentioned? The Disney team must have just fallen in love with him as fast as I did, because he was hired and he quickly found himself on the way to Orlando. So his job at Disney was to greet the people who came to the Animal Kingdom safari experience and give them their orientation, just like he was doing back in Africa, but with the zoo kind of thing that Disney has going on, that scaled down safari experience. So he would offer his personality and his beaming self to all of these Disney visitors. And it was such a perfect fit for him, his life experiences, his education, everything built toward it. All the puzzle pieces kind of fell into place. And he stayed at Disney for as long as his visa would last, which was a little over a year. But here's the cooler thing. This is the cool thing. Remember, he worked at a safari camp in Africa before he came to Disney. Well, just like he met us at Shindy, he had met many Americans as they came through the camps. And he is so charming, he developed bonds with people that were there, for a week on safari or whatever. And he had often spoken to these Americans about his dream to come to the U.S., and several of them had given him their information and said, buddy, if you ever make it over here, get in touch. We'd love to have you and host you or whatever. So he was just that friendly and engaging. He's really unforgettable. So throughout his time working at Disney, every time he got chunks of time off, he was going to New York City and to Washington, D.C. and to Las Vegas and to all the places that we want to see in America, because he had made these connections with people who said, yes, I remember you. Come, we'll show you our city, or whatever. You showed us your animals, we'll show you our city. And so he opened his heart, and they opened their hearts to him too. And Terry and I were actually tickled to know that he'd been to Sarasota, he'd been in this area, he knows our area very well, he'd been to Siesta Key and stuff. So he was just so charming. So he did it. He lived out his dream. And then he took his Disney experience, and if anybody's ever known or been to Disney, you know how special they are with all their little details. He took all of that knowledge back to Africa, to Shindi, where we ran into him. Karen Downey run these camps over there, where we met him. And I found out in talking to them that he was the general manager of the whole camp.
Wow.
And he's only 34 years old.
Wow.
So every detail of the Shindi camp was held to the standard that Disney maintains in their parks, because he was trained that way. So Galani's time in America prepared him perfectly for his career back in Botswana. So Galani was like Mark Nepo's Robert traveling companion. He kept walking until there was no longer a wall keeping him from his desired destination, his desired life. There is truly a lesson in that about the laws of curiosity and what we are pulled towards. So today's lesson is about staying in curiosity and vulnerability. Think about the vulnerability we had to live in, going back and back and back to these agencies, no matter how challenging it may be. Understanding that the first answer is not always the final answer. Many things can be happening at the same time, paradoxically. Albert Einstein said, the important thing is to not stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing. You know, we've all been taught that knowing and being right are highly valued, and that knowing and being right actually are more valuable than curiosity. But unfortunately, once we think we have our answer, we often stop being curious, right? We stop looking. And that blocks possibilities from showing themselves to us. Can you imagine if Albert Einstein stopped being curious after he got the first answer to all his great big questions? He stopped being curious further than the first solution he came upon? Or worse, stopped persisting after he ran into his first wall? He's like, I know something, right? We're also taught that we should only show the best parts of ourselves to the world around us, right? We curate our lives into these social media highlight reels rather than show others what's behind the scenes and the messiness of what's going on. We don't let others in on the backside of things where we are vulnerable and still trying to figure everything out, still walking along the wall, looking for the whole story to me. He shared the struggles it took, the disappointments along the way, the reality of limits of living in an undeveloped part of the African continent, the challenge of having to return to his home country when his visa ran out. He allowed all of his life aspects to be known and seen and celebrated, right? He found magic that is available in the space where there is high investment and low attachment. We talked about that in Sacred Cup this morning. High investment, low attachment. That means that we stay very engaged, very passionate, very invested in the outcome, while paradoxically remaining unattached to what the outcome may look like. And holding this little middle way can be challenging because our inclination is to choose a side or an option and then move quickly in that direction to get it solved fast, right? Staying open and curious keeps us in that potentiality that paradox allows. Galani did that. Mark Nepo did that. Albert Einstein certainly did that. Highly invested, but holding low attachment to how things unfolded. So can you think of something in your life, where you could apply this high investment, low attachment paradox? A part of your life where you want something to change. It doesn't have to be big, like going to another continent and living somewhere else. It could be that big, but it could be something small, like I want a new job or a new house or a new love or a new situation, right? High investment, low attachment. Is there a way that you can be extremely passionate about what you want, but keep yourself in the curiosity place as to how the solution will show up? Is there a way to stay open and curious when you run into a barrier that seems to block the way? Can you stay invested even then? The longer we can stay invested in the question without jumping to a conclusion or an answer, the more possibilities have a chance to reveal themselves. My top title is, I'm Just Not Right. Because I want to stay in the question, stay in the land of possibilities and potentiality, especially when the seeming barriers come up, when in my rightness. You know what, at any point along the way, Galani could have thrown his hands up and said, forget it. I'm just not meant to go to America. I don't have any of the legal documents it takes to make that happen. I don't even have reliable internet to communicate with these sophisticated people at Disney World. The answer could have been, at any point along the way, it's just not for me. But no, he didn't do that. He stayed open to the possibility that the pieces would fall into place somehow, and they did. High investment, low attachment. By staying open to possibilities, we refuse to be limited. Galani refused to be limited. He knew the limitations of the world he lived in, but he refused to accept them as the final answer. And that is our call in life, to be very aware of what we allow to limit us and then move beyond them. This applies to human stuff and spiritual stuff, and that is the paradox, right? Guy Finley wrote, it's a paradox of the true spiritual path, but the more conscious we become of what limits us, the more limitless becomes our life. Once we're aware of what limits us, then it doesn't limit us anymore. The question is, do you know what limits you? What answers have you accepted as the final answer that perhaps you could reconsider? What have you already decided you're afraid of and therefore unwilling to engage? Keep growing and learning. You know, this is where this busting loose class, for those of you in the class with me, this is where this busting loose class is touching me, and I know a lot of you too. We talked about that in Sacred Cup too. It's shifting me away from everything that I've been taught is real and limiting, especially when it comes to money and finance and beliefs and barriers around them. And if you're in the class, I hope you will sit in the curiosity as we learn how to challenge our rightness on this subject. I'm declaring that I am just not right. I'm just not right. Hit a wall and keep walking around it. That's the lesson today. And I'm going to close with the same quote I started with to see if we can anchor it in and understand it a little deeper. It says, Karen Walrond in the Lightmakers Manifesto said, following our curiosity, envisioning our ways forward, all with a mindset of expectation in a field fraught with disappointment, these things bring light. Of course we will fail. Of course we will need to give ourselves countless self-compassion breaks, but curiosity, experimentation, persistence, tenacity, and the expectation of failure will yield results. You will learn, pivot, adjust, and achieve. It's the physics of curiosity. And like all laws of the universe, it is immutable. Immutable means that the law applies to everyone, even you, even Galani, even Nepo, even Einstein.